All right, so if you haven't heard, President Trump tweeted a picture of himself, and it seems and appears to be a figure of a Jesus Christ likeness that has his face on top of it and has now been deleted. And people from all over the world, believers, Christians, Catholics alike, they have been reacting in various ways. And I want to break down some of this stuff because there's a lot of reaction, and in some sense, rightly so. But in another way, you have to look at some of the details behind it, because if you've followed me for a long time, you know that I look at certain things with grace and in the eyes of it being, in some sense, practical in terms of how to look at it holistically as opposed to just the outcome. So let's look at it, let's analyze it, and we'll talk about it from several angles. All right, so first of all, the picture here, if you haven't seen it or you think there's no proof, it has been posted. I also took a screenshot of it myself at Korea time morning. Here it's posted 8:49 p.m. And this was, I think, just after he posted something about Pope Leo. And so we'll talk about that in a different video, but this is him. This is what it looks like. And just quickly as context, somebody online, Mend Ilin, had researched that this was actually a post reposted with some alterations from Nick Adams back in February. So Nick Adams, in a now deleted tweet, first posted this, as you can see here, with some alterations from his current post. So we'll talk about that here in a second. So here's what President Trump had to say when asked about this in a recent but separate event where a DoorDash driver was delivering something and they were talking about no tax on tips.
Do you have any questions?
Mr. President, did you post that picture of yourself depicted as Jesus Christ?
Well, it wasn't depicted. It was me. I did post it, and I thought it was me as the doctor, and it had to do with Red Cross, as a Red Cross worker there, which we support. And only the fake news could come up with that one. So I just heard about it, and I said, how did they come up with that? It's supposed to be me as a doctor making people better, and I do make people better. I make people a lot better. As an example,
and as proof, this post has been deleted now and is being reported across different media groups and is being, in some sense, criticized for this. And I even went on Nick Adams' page, and he's a conservative, I think, commentator and poster who is also in support of Trump. But in his February 4th post, there's nothing that shows him posting this. So at some point, he deleted this between then and now. And what's interesting is that the post has been, in some sense, altered significantly from its original post. And I believe that it went through some kind of AI filter. So if you can see this video here, it's kind of tabbing through back and forth the difference between the two posts. And one of them that's notably different is that this top figure here was changed into this three-horned winged angel type of figure. And everything else, in some sense, is slightly altered. The word veteran here, his face, all these things have been slightly altered to some degree. And so that is evidence of it being altered from an AI generated or AI filter. And because a lot of people screen capture this, this is complete evidence of somebody finding out that this was a repost from Nick Adams back in February and then altered to be what it is now. And a lot of media is not reporting on some of this stuff. Now, one thing you got to remember is that although he admits to him posting it, he actually, I believe, doesn't post it completely himself. And we know this because in Trump's documentaries, namely this one from Art of the Surge, where they followed him and his daily life on the campaign trail, it shows him having assistants who he tells what to post, what to say, and then he screens other things like images and memes and these things that come up. And here's a small clip of that.
close the border. She just called to give all illegals citizenship. Say goodbye to the USA.
Trump and
NATO wasn't paying their bills. I saved NATO. She hates Israel. You got it, Dan?
How many troops have you put out there?
About 40. She's complaining.
Has she said anything on China?
Has she mentioned fracking?
Kamala Harris is a threat to democracy.
So if we put all that together, and I'm not saying I'm excusing him for what he's doing, I believe it's not a good look, especially for believers and for himself. But if you look at it from like an objective perspective, what he's doing is with all the volume of tweets and truths that he's posting, what he does is that although he has a barrage of things he says, there are certain things like images and the creation of content. He himself doesn't know really how to use some of this stuff, this technology. He himself admitted that he hasn't used AI in some video a long time ago. I don't know what it is now, but of course with the volume of stuff happening, what he does is he filters it and then he approves it and then it goes forth. So he probably didn't know that this was a repost of Nick Adams and somebody put this through an AI generator to change it up. And as he admits here, he thought that the perspective or the impression he would give off would be as a healer, and with the backlash, of course, he took it down. And again, I'm not excusing what he's saying and doing, but he didn't sit there and look at it and say, oh, I'm going to portray myself to be Jesus. And I personally believe that he actually innocently thought that this is going to portray himself in a certain light, especially coming from that post talking and criticizing Pope Leo. And I'm not saying that he's this perfect person. Of course, as you guys have known me for a long time, I believe that God had handpicked Trump to be used for such a time as this to combat evil, but he also has to himself humble himself before the Lord, acknowledge him. And although he has begun in some sense like a King Cyrus, he's growing to be more open, accepting, and proclaiming the Lord as Christ as Savior. And so again, I'm not saying I know what his salvation is. All I know is that his fruit is showing in many ways what you need to be doing in this time to tear down modern day Asherah poles, modern day statues of Baal, and all these things. And it's in alignment with what a believer should have in this time, especially if you don't understand how to interpret certain things in the political and social perspective. And so I believe if I'm looking at this from a position of grace and in mercy, that he innocently tried to portray himself in a certain light, but it came off in a certain way, so he had to backpedal, backtrack. But he isn't sitting there on his high horse and saying, oh, I'm Jesus Christ, I am of course gonna take over the world and I'm better than Christ and all these things. So it's not like that. So many believers right now are angry and upset, and in some sense rightly so, especially if you are a weaker believer that has some sensitivity to how Trump and politicians and this impression, this image that they have in a certain way, and you can only go off of, in some sense, black and white decisions without having some grace and objectivity behind how this might look and how the process is, as I attempted to just now dissect it. But I want to just leave it at, hey, many people are also prophesying that Trump has to be humbled and he has to, in some sense, get his attitude and his heart posture in check. So I believe that. I believe that anybody in leadership, anybody that has a role for the kingdom, you have to have your heart posture, your position relative to Christ and of the Lord in check, because you see what it was like with King David, King Saul, these guys, many prophets and kings alike in the Bible, where God had to deal with them because of how they positioned themselves between them and the Lord and not humbling themselves before him. So who knows what his relationship is like behind closed doors. Hopefully he's repenting and cleansing himself on a daily basis, and if not, getting prayed over, all these different things. But he's a busy man, and he in some sense is dealing with many bigger issues than some of this stuff. So the media, listeners, everybody that's hating him on the left, all that, even believers, they're hopping him on little things left and right. But of course, there's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of stuff happening. And so we have to, in some sense, look at it from that perspective, but also keep him in check. Make sure that we're praying for him, making sure that he has the right attitude, perspective behind everything that's happening, especially with a position such as the office of the President of the United States, which is a big, big deal. So let's keep praying for him. Let's look at this from as much of a objective, graceful perspective as possible. But this is just my 2 cents. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you guys like this kind of video, please like and subscribe. I don't ask this for much, but on this channel, we look at political, social, different news and interpretations from a Christian perspective and also from a truth teller's point of view. And if you guys want to support me, I'm listener supported. All the information is down below. If you guys want to help financially, I would love that continued support. GiveSendGo.com/Chrisyoonyt. Love you guys. Talk to you guys very soon.